Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of The Chocolate Life Live. My name is Clay. I'm your host today, and I'm also the creator and the moderator of TheChocolateLife.com. Today's topic is non-traditional pairings, pairing chocolate with what? Right, and I just had, when I came up with the title, it just reminded me of a colleague of mine, a friend who uses that particular intonation of the word "what" in a lot of our conversations, and so it was important to me that I get that out. Before we begin, what I want to remind everybody is there is a comment section. So when you're watching, just please let me know where you're connecting from, what part of the world you're connecting from. That way I can get you up on the screen, I can give you a shout out, and for me, it's just a lot of fun knowing where people are connecting from around the world. And with that, let's get stuck in to today's topic. And today's topic is non-traditional pairings, pairing chocolate with what? And I promise that's the last time I will do that. So I want to point out that for every single one of these Chocolate Life live streams, I put together a post on TheChocolateLife.com. The post for today is here. You can go to TheChocolateLife.com. It's on the homepage. If you go to the homepage, you'll find it here. Right, click through onto the link, you'll get to this page, and it provides the reason for my doing this, the background, the source, what I wanted to accomplish during the day, and if there are links to resources that will be talked about during the course of the live stream. And here, what you'll do is you'll find a link to a previous live stream I did, episode 57, talking about breaking pairing boundaries. And if you click through to that post, what you'll do that there are some additional resources. Number one is I talk about my approach to pairing. So you can go and refer to these after the fact. So I have a couple of guidelines that I use to pairing. I'm a big science fiction fan. So Isaac Asimov and his laws of robotics. That's why there's a zeroth law of robotics for people who are real fans of the series, not just the original Foundation series and iRobot and things like that. But there's also another set of resources. So these are examples of particular pairing classes that I've given here. So a Valentine's Day 2017 wine, beer and pairing, chocolate pairing, chocolate and cheese at the San Francisco Wine School, and then another live stream I did about my approach to pairing everything. So there's a lot of background resources that you can get to after you get done watching this particular live stream. Now, at the bottom of every post, there is a comment section. If you are a member and you're logged in, you can add comments. So one of the great reasons for being a member of the Chocolate Life is the ability to put your comments into the live stream here, or put your comments onto posts on the Chocolate Life. But with that, what I want to do is I want to talk about this whole idea of non-traditional pairings. And if I look at the responses that I got on places like LinkedIn to this, people were saying, well, because I mentioned wine and beer, people said, well, what about scotch? And what about tequila? And what about these other things? And I wanted to follow up on a topic that came up during the Valentine's Day live stream. So you may remember that during the Valentine's Day retcon live stream, which is last Friday, I believe it was, that one of the things that I talked about is I talked about this notion of how do I take a holiday, for example, like Valentine's Day, and how would I go and create something for Valentine's Day gifting that might be non-traditional? And I ran across this article. Whoops, excuse me, I've already scrolled down. This article on USA Today, and it's each state's favorite Valentine's Day treat. And while these are not unconventional, right, what I might say is that if I am a chocolate maker or confectioner who lives in Alabama, then it turns out that for some reason gummy bears are the number one candy gifting treat in Alabama. So if I wanted to do something, maybe I could buy giant gummy bears. They exist, and dip the gummy bear in different colors of chocolate. So maybe I could do a white chocolate and then maybe do a raspberry or put a food coloring in it and make a pink colored chocolate. I mean, you get the idea. You've made something for Valentine's gifting that reflects what the favorite gift is in each one of these states. And so chocolate-covered strawberries, no surprise. But there's a heart-shaped donut in Hawaii. And so this represented, I think, a very, very different way of thinking about how to go about creating non-traditional or unconventional pairings. And that's what it is that I want to follow through on today, right? So what are some other sources of inspirations that someone might have for creating unconventional and non-traditional pairings? And so I was intrigued when I ran across this article, which is that Hershey created a candy pairing guide. And this was specifically for holiday traditions. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. It's based around events. So it's based around specific holidays. So if I were doing something for a Christmas holiday, what it would be. If I were doing for something for a Thanksgiving holiday, what it would be. Excuse me. And it turns out that when I went and researched this is a search engine called Neeva that I use. It turns out that a lot of people picked up this particular story, right? That Hershey had done a candy pairing guide, and it's all over the place. And this is one of the representations. Every time I saw this report, it consisted of two things. Number one, an infographic which showed the United States with some icons on it. And then it was accompanied by this graphic, which when we zoom in, right, what we can say is we have the top 10 holiday traditions overall. Number one, decorating a Christmas tree. And so Hershey's thought here, right, and they're thinking about just their candies, but I think is a really interesting concept, is if I was going to be decorating the Christmas tree with significant other, with my family, if I invited friends all over to decorate the Christmas tree, what kind of chocolate would I want to do? Would I want to prepare for them? So it could be sort of a chocolate with maybe crushed candy canes because I put candy canes on the tree. It could be a hot chocolate, maybe with mint marshmallows, again, with a mint theme. So I'm thinking really, really cool idea, right? To think about traditions around holidays, and then how would I use that idea to create products? Right, very, very cool. So if you're in a community where there is a really big tradition of going out and looking at holiday lights and decorations, and by the way, I don't have an answer for this one right now. What would you give to people? What would you make for people so that it would make celebrating, getting in the car and driving out and seeing lights a lot more fun? Again, I don't know the answer to that question right now, but what would it be? For, again, decorating the Christmas tree. So you as a chocolate maker, you as a confectioner, what you might do is you might have a holiday tree chocolate decorating kit. And when you open it up, what it is, it's something to make a hot chocolate or something, or it is, things that you can go and enjoy with friends and family while you're decorating the tree. And so what I want everybody to do is I want everybody to go and look at this and go, right? What would I do? Now, this is just for the Christmas holidays, it appears. So we have exchanging gifts. Well, I don't know how knowing that a lot of people exchange gifts helps me put together anything specific. But again, we have a tradition of decorating the tree, watching a favorite movie. So if I was watching It's a Wonderful Life, or I was watching Miracle on 34th Street, could I create something which was themed to a particular movie? What would I do with the Home Alone series, for example? Could I use that as an inspiration for doing some sort of holiday pairing? And so anyway, for many people, I think that the idea of, my looking to Hershey, the Hershey company, as an inspiration for something to do is rather interesting, and very non-traditional and out there in left field. I did mention in the post that there was going to be a twist which even M. Night Shyamalan might think was interesting. And that is the twist here. That what I've done is I've been looking at the Hershey company for inspiration. Before I go and explore this theme a little further, I want to give a quick shout out to Mark and Yuri from my fans. Thanks, guys. I'm fans of your work, as you know, from Blue Spruce Chocolate in Kittredge in the foothills above Denver. So Gay, glad you're watching today. And, if you've had any of these ideas, Mark, Yuri, or there's something here that strikes you as interesting in the context of your business, let me know in the comments. I'll get it up on the screen. If anybody of you have questions about what it is that I'm talking about, let me know. I'll get it up on screen. So, I think that was it. So what I want to do is actually get in a little closer on the holiday traditions pairing guide. And again, this is, I didn't find any large versions of this, so I couldn't do a higher resolution version. I don't expect you to read this. That's why it's on the page. What I will do is I will go back to this post, right? And underneath this resource, I'll put links to all these other pages after I get done here today. So you can go and look at these things yourself. So this candy pairing guide. So they're saying decorating the Christmas tree. For some reason, they recommend peanut butter and milk chocolate. So I think the Reese's peanut butter cups. All right, I'm not certain what that's got to do with it. For watching a favorite movie, they suggest Dr. Seuss themed Hershey's Kisses. That makes sense if you're watching When the Grinch Stole Christmas. They apparently have Grinch themed packaging for ads. But what that says is, oh yeah, well, if I'm watching The Grinch Stole Christmas and I don't want to buy Hershey candy, what would something which is green would make an enormous amount of sense to do because of the color of the costume. So I'm looking at the source material as finding a way to connect with a particular chocolate product that already exists or one that I could make. I mean, they make a really interesting notion of, if I'm hanging or filling stockings, then having something related to a candy cane. In this particular case, it is a clear plastic tube, and it's got some stuff in a clear plastic tube that resembles a candy cane, and it's got some stuff in it. Well, a very, very interesting idea and something to think about, which is, again, I think comes out of left field. It's not a way that I would have thought about going about and doing this. And I think it's a really, really good idea. And it's one that I recommend to people. So if anybody is watching has got a holiday tradition that's near and dear to their hearts, and what they have done is they have created a specific chocolate or chocolate product to go with that holiday moment. It could be Christmas, could be Thanksgiving, could be Valentine's Day. Easter is upcoming. That's another. So I would say, what are the Easter traditions that I have in my family or that I know of? So would it be around the egg hunt? Would it be, if we give Easter baskets in my family, one of the things that we used to do with Easter baskets is that the kids would be away sometimes at Sunday services. I cooked for the congregation. I was not a member. My wife was a member. And what I would do is I'd cook for all of the services. And then we'd come back home and the grandparents would have hidden the Easter baskets, but they would have laid trails of jelly beans, like bunny poop. And the kids could follow the trails of jelly beans, picking them up until they found the Easter basket. Maybe there's something in that activity which says, oh, I could create an interesting chocolate product to be able to share with people. And so in thinking about that, and thinking about where we get inspirations of, what I wanted to do is spend a lot of the rest of the time thinking about non-traditional explorations. Some places where you can go and get inspiration for making chocolate products, which might surprise people. And in some cases you're going, I'm trying to pair chocolate with what? Right. And one example of that for me is, so taking a food tradition, like I'm a particular fan of a form of Japanese sushi called the temaki, which is a hand roll. And I once said to myself, how am I going to create a hand roll with chocolate? I wanted something which could be sort of put together a la minute, so in the moment and handed to someone over the course of some sort of presentation that I was involved in. And I came up with the idea of, instead of using seaweed, so instead of using nori, of using very, very thinly sliced bresaola. So bresaola is an air-cured beef. And I would take slices of this bresaola, and I would, they're normally fairly round, so I'd cut them in half, and so I got a semicircle. And what I would do is I would put a little goat cheese on the bresaola, then a couple of baby arugula leaves, and then some shaved dark chocolate. And then I would roll it up, and it would be like a mini hand roll, a mini sushi hand roll. And while it sounds strange, you've got there's a texture of the air cured beef, which is really, really wonderful when you bite into it, and then you bite into and through it into the goat cheese. You've got the bitterness and greenness of the arugula, the pepperiness of the arugula too, and then a little bit of sweetness and bitterness from the dark chocolate. And while it sounds like an absolutely weird combination to do, it turns out that, with the right goat cheese and with a very, very good bresaola, obviously, and very, very clean, fresh arugula and a good chocolate, the flavors, and more importantly for me, because I key a lot on texture, the textures work extremely well. And so that's what I was thinking of when I went and did that. So I wanted a way to deliver the chocolate. And while you might not think of it as a pairing, and I suppose technically it's not a pairing, what we're doing is we're actually presenting chocolate in a way that is confounding. And it turns out that these little temaki go very well with various kinds of wines. The meat would normally go with a red wine. The cheese might normally go with a white wine. So it works no matter what kind of wine you're serving. So it's really, really great in that context. So just an idea. So one way of thinking about these non-traditional pairings of chocolate and whatever is to think of a favorite food you've got, a food tradition. So in this particular case, Japanese. In this particular case, it's temaki. And how might I reimagine a temaki away from the conventional ingredients into something that I could use to incorporate chocolate? So, and I get to think of each ingredient separately. So, what am I going to use for the wrapper? I could use nori. It has a particular texture. There are flavored noris, which provide a bunch of different flavor opportunities. But in my particular case, I was looking to play with something that gave me a very different texture, right? So replacing the nori with a meat, the bresaola was for me the start of the process. Then, I'm not a big fan of cream cheese as a filling in a Japanese roll. So I was looking for something other than cream cheese, but would provide a flavor and texture contrast to the bresaola. And so goat cheese was me. There's a very, very specific French goat cheese, which is called fleur vert. So green flowers, which is my favorite goat cheese in the world. If you can find it, it's not available all year round, but it's insane. It's one of the things that I can binge eat if I have it around. So I also don't get it very often, but a really, really good cheese. So again, this is just the way my mind works when I think about these things. So what I want to say, and here's another one. So what you can also do is you can think about an ingredient and then try to deconstruct a particular ingredient. So I was asked to do something with chocolate that was warm, right, for a food festival that included craft beer as well as barbecue. And I'm trying to think, how can I serve chocolate warm in this context? And fondue was an obvious way to think about it. But I'm thinking to myself, how do I do a chocolate fondue and something that might go with craft beer, right? And with, pork in some form or beef in some form. And that led me to an explorer, just asking myself the question, what are butter and cream as components of a fondue? And I said to myself, well, they're emulsions of fat and water in different ratios. And it occurred to me, if cream and butter are just emulsions of fat and water in different ratios, then what I can do is I can I can make a fondue with any liquid and any fat, as long as I get the ratios roughly correct, right? And that led to the idea of making a chocolate fondue with beer and bacon fat, right? And it sounds really crazy, and you take, you want thick cut bacon, right? Ideally, I mean, and I used to use slab bacon and then hand cut it myself. And then you put it in a grill pan and you get it crispy, crunchy. So you want parts of the bacon to be crispy. You want parts of the bacon to be chewy. You just want the fat to be melting off in your mouth, right? So you're looking for that collections of textures that bacon can get, and only a thick cut bacon will get you. Then slice it into big lardons. So you want big chunks of it. Set it aside, keep it warm. Then take some beer. You don't want a dark beer because you don't want anything in the beer that's going to go bitter when you cook it. So you don't want, and you don't want anything that is bitter already. So nothing that's too hoppy, not an IPA. So a Pilsner or a lager, something like that. And you're going to deglaze the pan that you cook the bacon with the beer. So you've got warm beer. And by the way, you pour off the bacon fat before you deglaze the pan. And then you put some chocolate. You don't want a fruity chocolate. You want a pretty straightforward, just chocolate flavor chocolate. And I use a combination of milk and dark chocolate when I do this. And then I put in the right ratios of bacon fat and beer, and put together a beer and bacon fat fondue, into which I dip the bacon, right? And that is what it is that gets served. It is the bacon, usually a smoked bacon, and you serve that to people. It sounds so wrong in so many ways, but I can tell you that it's absolutely amazing. It's absolutely wonderful. You got a really good bacon, you got a really good beer. You can make a chocolate fondue that is absolutely stunning. And if you're doing this, especially in a food festival context, where what you have to do is you have to get people a lot of small samples, it's a great thing to do, because it's easy to serve, and you can put it on a cracker. I usually like a saltine or something like that, and it can be how you serve it. So it ends up being fairly low maintenance in that respect. But it is, I think, a really good way of going and thinking about pairings, which is there an ingredient that I'm using which can be broken down into simpler components? And if there is an ingredient, that I can break down into simpler components, how do I think about those components? And do those components give me an opportunity to do something new and interesting and different? And so asking what seems to be a fairly simple question, what are cream and butter, right, led to just a fabulous result. And I probably served this at 4 or 5 food festivals around the New York City area over a bunch of years. And I always have a very, very long line when I do it. So if you're out there in the West and you want to do chocolate at a food festival, Mark, this would be a great one to go do. So I want to go and take a look at this list of official foods by state. And if people have responses to this and you want to put them in the comments, let me know if you think about something that comes to you about how you might approach this. But I'm going to go through and I'm going to go figure this out. Now, I've looked at the first 2. So I have thought about these already. But once we get beyond the first 2, I have no idea. So we find that the favorite food in the state of Alabama is a turkey. It's the official food, maybe not the favorite food, but it's the official food of Alabama is the turkey. And I'm trying to think, okay, how would I do chocolate and turkey? Again, this is not necessarily a pairing exercise. It's how would I do chocolate and turkey together? Well, an obvious way to do this would be to think about mole poblano. So a mole poblano, this is the mole from Puebla, which includes chocolate, right? But I'm in Alabama, and Mexican may not be the right way to think about this for Alabama. And so then I'm thinking, I have a roast turkey. It makes me think of Thanksgiving. So what might I do? What are some things that might go with Thanksgiving? And I'm thinking cranberry relish, right? That would be an interesting one, and maybe pecans. And so could I do a chocolate, right? Which reminds me of Thanksgiving, right? And so that chocolate might might or might not have pecans in inclusion, but it could also have cranberries and orange peel and the spices that I associate with Thanksgiving, including clove and nutmeg and cinnamon. So it is something that would remind me of a holiday tradition, turkey, right? And the way that turkey is consumed. So I could create a chocolate bar which had these ingredients as inclusions, right? Or flavorings, right? And and I'm sitting here and going, yeah, dried cranberries with crystallized orange peel, with nutmeg and cinnamon and mace and clove. I'm going, oh man, this is a bar I want. And the most important thing about it is that it works at Thanksgiving and it works at Christmas, not just in the state of Alabama. So it's a way to think about these things and using them as inspirations. Alaska, salmon. How would I go about doing chocolate and salmon? It turns out I've done this before, but I'm gonna think about this in a different way. So one of which is to talk about one way I've used salmon in a non-traditional way, which is to use what we would call lox, or very thinly sliced smoked salmon. Although lox is a cured salmon, you want to use a smoked salmon for this. And what I would do is it's in very thin slices, and I would slice those slices into ribbons, and I would pan fry them until they're very, very crisp and crunchy. I make a risotto with goat cheese, not the fleur vert, but I make risotto with goat cheese instead of traditional Parmesan and other Italian cheese choices. And what I will do is I will make the goat cheese risotto, and then I will put these strips of crispy, crunchy salmon on top of the risotto. And they're salty as well, and they're smoky, and it provides a great textural contrast to the very, very smooth, creamy risotto. It's very, 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 very nice. Usually with white wine, sometimes with a little bit of lemon. I'm seeing it here, but I think you can get the idea of the contrast of textures with that crispy, crunchy salmon and the very smooth risotto. Another way to think about salmon, right? And this is something that I have done, is just ask yourself, okay, is it possible to sort of deconstruct and reconstruct any of the classic French mother sauces? And the answer is yes. You can deconstruct classic French mother sauces and replace some of the butter in the sauces with either cocoa butter or chocolate. And so, for example, you can make a white chocolate hollandaise sauce. And you have to be careful with the sweetness, obviously. But if you add some cocoa butter in there, it actually stabilizes the emulsion and it makes the sauce more stable. So it will hold longer over service. And I can tell you that a white chocolate hollandaise with asparagus, which is often a side for salmon, would be a really wonderful thing. I did that once when my book was launched, Discover Chocolate in 2007. I had a weekend chocolate event at a bed and breakfast in Washington, D.C., and we served white chocolate hollandaise on eggs Benedict for the Sunday breakfast. A really, really good idea. But you can also do this with a beurre blanc. So you could replace some of the butter in the beurre blanc with any of the chocolate. So white chocolate, milk chocolate, which I wouldn't recommend, or dark chocolate. And that's what I did. I created a dark chocolate beurre blanc, right? Contradiction in terms, and used it as a sauce for serving the salmon, right? So sounds a little crazy. I can tell you it's a really, really good idea. Another way that you might do this with the salmon is that you could create a balsamic glaze. So often there'll be a drizzle, right? Or somebody will do some platescaping or something like that with a balsamic and serve the salmon. And take balsamic vinegar, sugar, so you get to control the sweetness of it, and then add some cocoa powder to it. Cook it, reduce it down until you get the thickness that you want. And now you've got a chocolate or cocoa flavored glaze that you can put on top of the salmon. Another way to do it with salmon. A third way that I might think about doing this would be, can I create either a crust, So something which has got fairly large particles sizes to it. So could I create a crust for this with cocoa nibs in it? So sometimes you'll get a Parmesan crusted salmon. Could I put cocoa nibs in with salmon? And so I know that cocoa nibs and Parmesan work together because I've done Parmesan tuiles with cocoa nibs in them and use them as crunchy and decorative elements in a lot of different ways. So that would be a cool thing to do. Would be thinking I create a crust for it, or then could I create a rub for it? So I'm using cocoa powder in that particular case with other ingredients and could create a rub for the salmon. And then out there in right field, in a very different way, is could I actually take cocoa beans and smoke the cocoa beans? So like I would do a smoked salmon, could I smoke the cocoa beans and then use the smoked cocoa nibs from those beans in a particular way? And so another way to think about it is, could I smoke the salmon with the cocoa beans? So rather than smoking the salmon with hickory or apple or cherry or some other wood like that, could I take some cocoa beans, get them wet, and put them on top of the fire? And would it invoke the flavor of cocoa? Would it invoke something interesting in the salmon? So a bunches of different ways to think about salmon, a fish. We don't normally think about salmon as something we would do with cocoa and chocolate, but hey, that's a bunch of different ideas that occurred to me. And so the first two I have done. Now we get on here, and we've got a chimichanga. Right, so a deep fried burrito. In this particular case, I think there are a couple of things we might do. If we have a beef filling, so the beef filling here, whether it is a ground beef or whether I've got something which is a shredded beef, what I would do is I would do a mole style sauce on it. So I would throw some chocolate into whatever it was that was the filling. If I were doing, it doesn't matter if I'm doing beef, if I'm doing chicken, whatever it is that I'm doing, I would do it that way. If I was doing a vegetable version of the chimichanga, then what I would do is I would be taking whatever sauce that I was putting on the outside of it, and I would be using chocolate or cocoa in the sauce. So we have a chocolate chimichanga, and let's not overlook the dessert chimichanga, right? So let's take a crepe. So we want a sweet shell rather than a savory shell. So we're talking about a crepe batter for that. And then we're going to cook that. We're going to put some chocolate batons in it, perhaps. So something like what we might put in a pain au chocolat, or we could do a ganache or something else. Put it in the middle, wrap it up, and then deep fry that. And then I wouldn't use sour cream. Maybe what we would do is take a white sugar icing or a buttercream frosting, something like that. And now we have a chocolate chimichanga, a dessert chimichanga using chocolate. So those are three different ways I might do a chimichanga. Okay, so rice pudding. So rice is the state food of Arkansas. They talk about rice pudding. So an obvious way to think about rice pudding was, could I use cocoa nibs as an inclusion in rice pudding? Could I take sugar? I wouldn't want to, so maybe what I would do is I would throw, chocolate. I would, so maybe what I would do is if it's the pudding is hot, then what I would do is I would put some chocolate on top of it and let the chocolate melt, or take some chocolate chunks and put it in the rice pudding and let it melt. If I didn't have chocolate on the top, if I had chocolate in it and on the top, then if I were to do a brulee over the top of that, I don't know that I could put cocoa powder into the brulee because it would scorch. But there's something in there that says maybe there's something that I can do there. But right, make a rice pudding, cocoa nibs is an inclusion, mix chocolate chips if it's hot, and find a way to brulee it. And then after it's bruleed, maybe put a piece of chocolate on top of that, and it might melt slightly, or throw a little bit of, dust it with some cocoa powder in a nice little, if I could use a stencil, maybe after I've bruleed, stencil with cocoa powder on the top. Something like that would be an interesting way to do a rice pudding. If I wanted to do a savory rice, what would I do? That's where I might also, if I want to do a savory rice dish, I mean, one of the favorites in my family, after I got married, so not the family I grew up in, but my family as an adult, one of the things we used to do is we used to make what we call mac nut rice. So you take a lot of butter, and then you take macadamia nuts, and you'd pan fry the macadamia nuts in this brown butter and throw chili flakes into it. And then you take cooked rice and then mix that cooked rice in with that. And I'm thinking maybe throwing some pan-fried cocoa nibs into that. So some toasted cocoa nibs. Throw that into the mac nuts just before you're done with it. Could be an interesting way to add cocoa nibs to a savory rice dish. And I love macadamia nuts, especially when they're pan-fried in butter, right? I think, yeah, just a really, really good. Almonds. There are so many ways to use almonds in chocolate. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about almonds in chocolate. There are a gazillion ways to go about doing that. And I'm going to leave that as an exercise. So in Colorado, the state food is lamb. And again, I think the photograph tells it all. How would I do this? I would make some sort of crust or some sort of rub for the lamb and cook it that way. So if you're doing a crust, it may be breadcrumb based, and it's going to be, then you'd try to refine the cocoa nibs. So you'd grind them so they're like the same texture as coffee and mix them in with the breadcrumbs. Or you could use cocoa powder. You might dredge the lamb in the cocoa powder before putting the rest of the rest of the crust on the outside of it. I'm also thinking, could I make a gremolata? So a gremolata is a very coarse mixture of lemon and parsley and garlic. So it's lemon peel and parsley and garlic. I think that there is a way of incorporating a small amount of cocoa nib into something like that. And again, lamb is often served with a mint sauce or a mint jelly. And so having the chocolate incorporated into something that I might use as a sauce over the lamb would be an opportunity. And mint and chocolate go very, very well together. You have to be very careful. And something else that can be done here that could be interesting is something that is used in steak. And so maybe, I'll talk about it now and we can talk about it when we get to steak later, is when people talk about cocoa butter, they're thinking about the fat extracted from cocoa beans. Why don't we think about cocoa butter like a compound butter? So we take a regular butter and add cocoa nibs or cocoa powder and other flavorings to softened butter, and then form it and put it back in the refrigerator. And so the way I would serve off a steak, for example, often is with a slice of compound butter over the top that melts. And could I use cocoa butter over the top of it, a compound butter? So that might be a way to go do the lamb, especially if I could find local butter. That would be an interesting thing to do. So Mark, let me know if that's something that's, now you're in Colorado, if that's something you might do. The Connecticut, the official cookie of Connecticut is the snickerdoodle, right? And again, what would I do with a snickerdoodle? Could you make a chocolate chip snickerdoodle? That could be interesting. There is often sugar, which is dusted over the top of it during cooking. So could I throw some cocoa powder and or cinnamon along with the sugar and the snickerdoodle? That would be what I would do it. So it's a cinnamon sugar coated treat. Absolutely. Right. So throw some cocoa powder in there or chocolate in it. Now, one of the things that I love to do that could be an interesting way to do this is like a black and white cookie, which is to dip half of the cookie in tempered chocolate. Right? That could be a fun way to do it. Or what I like to do is what I call a black bottom cookie, is to take the cookie and then take a pastry brush and actually literally baste the bottom of the cookie with the tempered chocolate. Right. So you can, so if you can't tell there's chocolate in the cookie when from the top, but you turn it over, and that way there's also chocolate in every bite. So, which is a big bonus as far as I'm concerned, having a cookie where there's chocolate in every bite. An unusual way to do it. Delaware is the peach pie. Interesting. So how would I go about doing a peach pie? in a way that wasn't over the top. So number one, you'll see this peach pie has got a streusel topping. So you might put cocoa in the streusel topping, or I would put cocoa into the crust. Would be a way to go about doing it. You might peach pie is often served with whipped cream, and adding cocoa powder to whipped cream is a fabulous thing. So those are 3 ways to think about how to do a peach pie. Key lime pie, man. Key lime pie. How would I go about doing chocolate with a key lime pie? Again, putting cocoa powder into the crust would be a way about doing this. I don't know that candied cocoa nibs would work with this, but it would be something easy to try. It looks like I have some whipped cream around the edges of this, so that would be something that I would think about doing as well. And if you were to candy the cocoa nibs, and so there's a company that makes a crystallized lime, and so sometimes shaved chocolate. Julie, absolutely. Julie is sitting here going, shaved chocolate, save some chocolate. Absolutely. You could platescape with a little bit of chocolate as well. So have a little pool of chocolate, like where you would put the point of the pie slice. That's a great idea. So thanks for mentioning that. And I'm also wondering if you used like taking crystallized lime when you did a sugar cooked cocoa nib, putting the crystallized lime in there would be another thing to do. So that's something to think about. Key lime pie. So peaches, peaches. I love peaches. And grits and Vidalia onions are also on the list of state foods. But and they talk about making crumbles. My favorite way ever of incorporating peaches in chocolate was I did this at a food festival. And what I did was I made a buttermilk biscuit, right? So just a classic buttermilk biscuit recipe. But I added butterscotch bits, white chocolate bits, and bacon bits to the buttermilk biscuit recipe and baked it off, right? Then what I did is I took fresh peaches. They were Jersey peaches, not Georgia peaches in this particular case, because I'm in New York. And what I did was I cut them into eighths and then dipped them into sugar, granulated, just plain old white sugar, and then put them on the grill and caramelized them, cooked them and caramelized them on the grill. And then put these grilled caramelized peaches on top of a warm buttermilk biscuit. And then I had a milk chocolate caramel sauce to go over the top. So a way to use peaches in a non-traditional way, which incorporates chocolate in 3 different forms: butterscotch chips, white chocolate chips, and a milk chocolate caramel sauce. I couldn't make these things fast enough and keep the crowd happy. Hawaii coconut muffin. Again, it's a muffin. It's got a streusel topping. So putting cocoa powder in the streusel topping, putting chocolate or cocoa nibs. I mean, I would do this coconut muffin, and if it's got coconuts in it, although macadamia nuts are not endemic to Hawaii, they're originally from Australia. A lot of macadamia nuts have been grown in Hawaii, so I would think about chopped macadamia nuts, mixing them up with a coconut, putting some cocoa nibs in there with some cocoa powder in the streusel topping, right? Idaho potatoes. So, I mean, I'm sitting here and going, I knew this was, I should have anticipated this was coming, and I don't necessarily know that I have a best answer for this. Certainly, I could throw cocoa nibs in there. However, with a long roasting process, I worried about the nibs getting burnt, so I'd have to separately cook the nibs and incorporate them later. I like battered fries. So let's go to a direction of battered fries. Adding cocoa powder to the batter and throwing the fries in there would be a good way to do that. Now, just I want you to know, if another way to do this is, I've often been asked, how would I pair chocolate with anchovies? Right? Can you pair chocolate with anchovies? And the answer is, I would look to the Belgian tradition. and some French to some extent, but more Belgian, of serving French fries, pommes frites, with mayonnaise. And so what I would do is I would do an anchovy mayonnaise, which had cocoa powder in it, so an aioli, maybe a little garlic. And so I would make a complex mayonnaise, and I'd serve those. I dip the potatoes in those. And this actually might be an interesting place. Remember, I earlier when I was talking about the chocolate beurre blanc going with the salmon. Let's think about a German potato salad, right? And so a warm style potato salad. And what we're doing is an oil-based dressing rather than a mayonnaise-based dressing. So doing a beurre blanc. So again, we're not replacing 100% of the cocoa butter, but we could use a mixture of cocoa butter and olive oil and butter and make a warm, with some vinegar in it. Very nice. Okay, I was stumped at the beginning, but now I'm really happy about that. Popcorn. A couple of ways to do this. Number one is make a caramel, and then coat the popcorn in caramel, and then drizzle chocolate over the top of it. That would be the obvious way to go about doing it. I will sometimes take a salt, and I will add things like smoked paprika and other flavors to that. One I'm currently playing with that I really love is a Madras curry and hot smoked paprika. But cocoa powder, right? So you could dust these with cocoa powder, and that would be really, really good. Or make, again, if I take cocoa butter and real butter and cocoa powder, let's make a cocoa flavored butter. If I'm going to butter my popcorn, what could be better than that? Another pie. We've talked about this before. We can shave the chocolate over the top. We can add cocoa to the crust. We can do some platescaping with chocolate and then put the pie in there. So 3 different ways. If I'm doing a pecan pie, I don't know if pecan pie is on the list. What I love to do is I like to put grated chocolate on top of the crust, right? After it comes out of the oven from blind baking, I'm going to blind bake the crust. I'm going to line the inside of the crust with chocolate, melted chocolate, let it cool, and then put the filling in it and then bake it again. So I have chocolate as the base of the pie. Really, really good. Iowa has chosen s'mores. But no work needs to be done in upgrading the s'more, except to say you got to use better chocolate and better marshmallows. It looks like they're using, actually, this is not Hershey chocolate, and this is not Jet Puff marshmallows. So they've done everything they could possibly do to make this a better s'more. Kansas City barbecue. Again, this is where, could I make a mop sauce with cocoa or chocolate in it? Could I make a rub with cocoa or chocolate in it? That's the way I would approach barbecue. And again, another thing we might do is we might take the cocoa beans and we might take whatever meat we're going to be barbecuing, and we might smoke the meat over cocoa beans, which is something that I think is a really, really interesting idea that I don't know that anybody has done. So Kentucky cobblers, and if the blackberry is its official fruit. So I would, again, there are bunches of ways of thinking about going to this. We notice that we have this white layer. So we have what looks like to be a pastry cream or the kind of layer in here. So making something of that consistency out of white chocolate. So taking a white chocolate, adding some dairy, beating it up to aerate it. Maybe it's a meringue or something like that. There's something in there that can be done, which would be interesting. Of course, a chocolate flavored whipped cream. We could add cocoa powder or cocoa nibs into the base. We could shablon a layer of chocolate on top of the shortbread before we put whatever the pastry cream layer is in there. So bunches of different ways to incorporate chocolate into a presentation, a berry filling like this. Louisiana beignets, deep fried, right? So as we're forming the beignet dough, we just put a little chocolate in the layer. We close it up, we deep fry it, and we have chocolate, warm, hot chocolate. We have a melty, gooey chocolate center into a beignet. Yum, right? And what's interesting, if I'm in Louisiana, if I'm in New Orleans, I got criticized for calling it Nolans in a post recently. If we're in New Orleans and we are at the Café du Monde and we're right down there by the river and we're drinking chicory flavored coffee with the beignets that they produce at the Café du Monde, I would be very, very careful about the kind of chocolate that I use, because what I want is something that complemented the chicory flavor of the coffee that they served. It would be a very, very particular choice of chocolates that I'd want to use. Now, if I weren't drinking the coffee, I think I would experiment with a white chocolate filling, a milk chocolate filling, a dark chocolate filling, lots of different. And another way to think about doing it is, rather than using chocolate, you could put balls of frozen ganache. I mean, there's a fabulous Julia Childs recipe, and I don't know if anybody knows it, but she has a frozen chocolate truffle recipe where she makes a ganache, deep freezes it, and then she rolls it in successive containers, which have an egg wash, a sugar, and then breadcrumbs. And she'll let that set and do egg wash, sugar, and breadcrumbs again, and then deep fry it. So I think that's just a fabulous idea. I've been in love with the idea ever since I've heard it. I've tried it on one occasion, and it's really, really fabulous. And I would think about doing something like that with the beignet, playing with what's in the middle of the beignet when I'm doing that, so it's ooey and gooey when you go in bite down on it. Blue Spruce says Cocoa Supply has a blackberry powder that we added to a base white chocolate. I think that's I think if we're talking about cobblers here and we're talking about blackberries, I mean, this is actually blackberries, not freeze-dried blackberry as a flavor, but blackberries and white chocolate, fabulous combination. And it's something that I wish more people would do. For some reason, most people are focused on raspberries. I'm not quite certain, and strawberries, not quite certain why that is. There's a version of a blackberry. If you go to Oregon, the Loganberry, I just have amazing memories of, as a kid, doing the summer road trips that my family used to do every summer and getting Loganberry pie on roadside stands in Oregon. It's just like one of my favorite things. In Maine, whoopie pies. Well, I mean, we see chocolate chips on the outside of a whoopie pie. We could make a chocolate filling between the layers of the whoopie pie. We could put cocoa in the filling. So that's a pretty simple thing to think about doing. Crab. Oh my gosh. Crab. This is where, I mean, crab is something that often gets served with drawn butter, right? And so I would think about doing something with a butter or a butter sauce. Old Bay is sometimes used as a flavoring if I'm doing like a crawfish boil or a crab boil. Could I throw some cocoa powder in that to do something with that? There's lemon there. Could I make a very, very lemony aioli, right, with some cocoa powder in there? So those are some ways I would think about doing that. The Boston cream pie. We've already talked about pie in a bunch of different ways. There's chocolate on the top of this. I don't know we need to do anything more about that. But what I don't know that we'll get to a dessert here, and we're not going to get to the end of this list. We're only halfway through, right? But cheesecake. So we have chocolate cheesecake and pumpkin cheesecake. For everybody's out there who lives in a place where Mexican food is loved, mole cheesecake, right? So if you're using a cheesecake which has got cream cheese in it, substitute part of the cream cheese for the mole, right? Or you can swirl mole into a traditional cheesecake after you've put it into the pan for cooking. But I can tell you that if you get a nice, spicy, bitter, chocolatey mole and you put it into a cheesecake recipe, it is absolutely stunning and amazing. So here's the thought. I mean, go to TheChocolateLife.com, become a member, join, right? So or you could already be a member. If you're a free member, that's fine. If you have the resources, I mean, I don't do Patreon. All of the support is being done by members like you directly on the site. But if you go through this official list of foods in every state, and you have some ideas about how you might take the official food in a state and use it as inspiration for something to do with chocolate, go to TheChocolateLife.com, go to the non-traditional pairings post, this one here, the one with the leaves on it, and go down and add your ideas for something you might do in the comments. That would be great. If you go through the Hershey Traditional Pairing Guide and you have some ideas, go put them in the comments. If you got some other things that you want to do in terms of Valentine gifts, state by state, put them in the comments. I'm really, really interested to see where you might go and take completely other traditions, completely other sources of inspiration, right? And do something interesting with chocolate about them. And the last one I think that could be really, really interesting, because we got a couple of minutes left, is here is a list of state songs. Hold on a second. Let me get rid of this video. I just noticed that I can. Here's a list of official state songs. And I'm going, well, I don't know. Alabama is the state song. I don't know that song well enough. I don't know the Alaska state flag song. I don't know the Arizona March song, or Arkansas. I love you, California. I lived in California for many years. And I was born there after 1951. I have no idea what it's like. Colorado, where the columbines grow. Rocky Mountain High. Okay, that makes sense. John Denver. But I wonder if there's something in the lyrics of these songs, or the overall emotional appeal of these songs, that might give us some inspiration for if nothing else. I mean, Colorado is notoriously a cannabis-friendly state. So a chocolate bar which had other Colorado ingredients, which was called Rocky Mountain High, I'm almost, I don't know that you can trademark it, because it's copyrighted song title. I have no idea what the intellectual property is around that, but that would be an obvious, maybe too obvious, inspiration for a chocolate product, right? Based upon a song. Yankee Doodle, Yankee went to town riding on a pony, Doodle stuck a feather in his cap and called it macaroni. Okay. If it's like, man, when was the last time I thought about that song? And it's even the way to go. But now we call it macaroni. Okay, this is weird. So there are a number of people I know who make pasta, fresh pasta, and put cocoa powder in pasta. Right? So you could put cocoa in macaroni. There was a fabulous restaurant in New York City. It was on Central Park South, near Columbus Circle. I want to say Domenico's or something like that. I just don't remember what it was. And they used to make a duck ragu. And they'd put the duck ragu over cocoa pappardelle, if I remember correctly. And it was absolutely phenomenal. So macaroni, cocoa pasta, and something like that. Now, Connecticut is also the nutmeg state. And so there's something associated with nutmeg there. It's a very, very traditional flavoring used in a lot of New England cooking, in the 16, 17, 1800s. So doing something with nutmeg to go with pasta and chocolate would be a really, really interesting thing to think about doing. Nothing about Delaware, Swanee River, Georgia on my mind. Again, I don't know, but I would go and I would look at songs, right? And state nicknames and things like not just holiday traditions and not just the state food, the official state food, and look at those as sources of inspiration for ways that that might give me an idea for a way to work with chocolate and an ingredient that I hadn't thought of before. With the idea being, if we're talking about chocolate pairings, chocolate and what? Working with chocolate and anything, right? The normal way we think about that, the normal way we think about chocolate and food is we think about, how do I pair chocolate with wine? Or how do I pair chocolate with beer? Or a beverage like scotch or tequila or rum? These are very, very conventional ways of thinking about pairings. How to do chocolate and cheese, right? How do chocolate and cheese together affect, right, what wine or beer or other spirit I might put together with them? I mean, this is a real conventional, very, very traditional way of thinking about pairings, right? And the whole purpose of the live stream today is to throw that box away, throw those boxes away, right? It's not about forgetting them or thinking outside of them. It's just just throw them away. They don't exist. And if those traditional ways of thinking about pairing chocolate, working with chocolate and some other things are not things that you consider, what does that lead to, right? Where would you search for inspirations? And my hope today is that that's what I did for you, right? I went through number one, this whole idea that Hershey, right, might have a way of thinking about chocolate pairing, which would lead to the creation of products, is not something that I would have considered, how do holiday traditions, right? How do holiday traditions, right? Activities like decorating a Christmas tree or going out and looking at Christmas lights, right? Or filling and hanging stockings. How do these traditions lend themselves to a specific chocolate moment? Really, really powerful idea, I think, right? How can I think about the state that I live in and what the state food is? And how might I reinterpret the state food, right, through the lens of chocolate? I mean, unless chocolate is already an ingredient in the state food, but even if it is, I might have a unique take on it, right? If there is a state song, right, could the lyrics or could the emotional tone, right, of the song provide me with an inspiration for a chocolate something or other, right? And I hope that what I have done is inspired you to go and look at some of these ideas for yourself, that you're going to go and say, there's something about my background, my food culture, for example, the Japanese temaki, the hand roll. Is there a way of doing a hand roll with chocolate? I mean, there is a company out there, just in case you want to know, that takes nori, sheets of nori, spreads them with chocolate, and then puts another sheet of nori on top of them. And I can tell you, they are really good. I mean, it sounds very, very unconventional, very, very weird, seaweed and chocolate, but it can work if you think very, very hard about how to go about doing it. So is there a culture, again, when I was thinking about the chocolate fondue, thinking about cream and butters and its ingredients and how can I deconstruct them, right? So they become emulsions of fat and water. And how can I play with the liquid? So in this case, beer, but it could be a bunch of other kinds of liquid, right? And butter, right? The fat, so it could be any kind of fat. Duck fat? Ooh, man, right? It's like the only fat better than bacon fat is duck fat. So could I do something with that? Man, putting a chocolate sauce, chocolate and red wine sauce on top of venison is very South African, especially if you throw juniper berries in it. So I'm thinking of duck confit, which is one of my favorite things in the world to make, is a duck confit. So having chocolate, a sort of a smoky red wine chocolate sauce for duck, it's like I have to go and immediately go to the store and get something so that I can start cooking and doing some yummy things. Although to do duck confit correctly, it takes at least 4 to 5 days in the preparation. And then what you really want to do is you want to put the confit duck legs into a ceramic pot, fill that pot with duck fat, and then put it someplace cool for 3 to 4 months before you pull it out and consume it. I don't have that time, but it takes at least 3 days to do duck confit properly. So maybe I'll get that started. But I hope, if nothing else, right, I've proved the basic idea, which is if you're working with the basic idea, one of my mottos, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. And for me, one of the ways to have fun, and I hope that is something that all of you have been able to take away from this past hour, which is if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. And one of the great ways to work with chocolate and have fun is to work with chocolate and other foods and put them together in unusual ways to create something which is uniquely yours and uniquely tasty. And with that, everyone, ciao. I'll be back on Tuesday. Not certain what the topic is going to be yet. If you have some ideas, you can go to the calendar, post which is on the screen right now. It's the third one. And you can put an idea for something you'd like to see in the comments down there as well. And with that, everyone, listen, have a great weekend. If you've been affected by the crazy winter weather, hopefully you're not snowed in or you're not roasting too badly. Some parts of the country are under winter weather advisories, and some part of the country are under what I suppose could only be called winter heat advisory, which seems pretty crazy here. But enjoy yourself, take care, be safe, and we'll be back on a future episode of The Chocolate Life Live. Ciao, everyone.